Gonzalez, and this is From the South. The Supreme Court in the United States has upheld a controversial travel ban targeting several Muslim-majority countries that was proposed by the Trump administration in September 2017. Earlier this year, Hawaii and other states challenged this ban, arguing that it violates federal immigration law and constitutional protections against discrimination on religious grounds. The ruling is a big setback to anti-discrimination advocates as it blocks entry into the United States of most people from Iran, Libya, Somalia, Syria, and Yemen. In response, President Trump tweeted simply, "Wow." Everyone is welcome here. U.S. Vice President Mike Pence is in Brazil, where he's expected to meet President Michel Temer. A Brazilian diplomat told media that President Temer will press Vice President Pence on cases of Brazilian children separated from their parents upon trying to enter the United States. Pence has said he plans to use the trip to continue to put pressure on Venezuela's President Nicolás Maduro. Pence is on a two-day visit to Brazil. He will travel later to other Latin American countries, including Ecuador and Guatemala. In Barbados, the new Venezuelan ambassador Álvaro Sánchez is urging the media in Barbados to reach out to him if they see anything in international media about Venezuela to ascertain the truth against what's being reported. In his first press conference, he addressed the recent report by the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, which claimed that the Venezuelan security forces have assassinated hundreds of persons. He said the meeting and the ruling was unfair and made unilaterally against him. The United Socialist Party of Venezuela has condemned the new sanctions imposed by the European Union to 11 high-profile government officials on Monday. Vice President Delcy Rodriguez is the most senior member of Maduro's government to be targeted by travel bans and asset freezes. The 28 EU states pledged last month to punish Venezuela with sanctions over the May re-election of Maduro, which returned him to office until 2025. The European bloc also called for fresh presidential elections to be held in the country.
We understand that a Bolivarian position and a position of sovereignty bother certain de facto powers, but don't look at us as cowards. What they do with that policy is to blockade the country, to harm the country. They do it because they have no national power, no unity, no coherence, because they don't tell their supporters the truth.
Venezuela's Vice President for the Economy, Tarek El Aissami, has announced new moves to control the price of 50 essential goods. He said the government will be holding 3 days of meetings this week with different business sectors to agree the prices, which would then be enforced.
Once we reach an agreement on the prices, these will be published, so that the people can exert their own supervision and control over them. And then any agribusiness, any distribution chain, or retailers who break those agreed prices will face the full weight of the law against them.
In Nicaragua, the national dialogue is partially paralyzed as the opposition urges Daniel Ortega's government to call early elections as a requirement to officially resume the talks. Meanwhile, violence continues in the streets. A woman police officer was killed on Monday, and at least 8 people, including a baby, were killed over the weekend. 7 people were killed in the capital, Managua, and 1 in the city of Masaya. An emotional funeral was held for the 15-month-old baby who died when his mother was taking him to a babysitter. At least 194 people have been killed since the protests started 2 months ago, according to the Commission for Truth, Peace and Justice. Meanwhile, the United States continues its attempts to interfere. A group of senators called on President Donald Trump to impose sanctions on those who they see as responsible for human rights violations in Nicaragua. Let's go to our correspondent, María José Díaz, with more on this story.
The 3 tables set to discuss security, electoral processes and justice met on Monday at the Church of Our Lady of Fatima. This was confirmed by the members of the Episcopal Conference who are mediating the talks. Nonetheless, today the talks were cancelled and there hasn't been any confirmation about when they will resume. Meanwhile, the Ministry of Education announced it will renovate 59 schools that were damaged during the protests with the help of 9 brigades that will restore the buildings.
That was Maria Jose Diaz from Managua. The city of Masaya, in this case, located in western Nicaragua, has faced some of the worst violence of the ongoing political crisis in the country. Nonetheless, the citizens there continue to work to improve their city's economy and tourism.
This is the biggest market in Masaya, and the only one still open after more than a month of clashes, looting, deaths and more. 2 months after closing her store, Ivania decided to reopen its doors.
Thank God we are back open. You can see movement again. I thought it was all dead. We were terrified of the streets, but I can see that slowly changing. Fear is finally leaving this place, and we hope it will get better. It was unbearable, all the debt, all our concerns, and we had no work. But now we have a source of income again.
This artisanal market was burned down twice by opposition gangs. The last time it happened, they had to close it down for good. Freddy Barahona pushes his juice cart around these streets. He says business has dropped dramatically since there are no tourists. Yet he continues to work.
There is some movement and plenty of commerce because people have calmed down. We are working, which is what matters. But it's depressing to see so many young lives being lost and everything else that's happened.
The so-called City of Flowers used to be one of Nicaragua's main tourist attractions, thanks to its history and various cultural aspects.
Commerce is moving again. At least the surrounding areas and 2 out of the main 4 roads are active again. It will finally be a living city again.
The people of Masaya continue to rebuild and work towards peace. Meanwhile, in the capital city of Managua, representatives from small and big businesses of the tourism sector took part in a dialogue table in order to promote and improve their work.
Current Paraguayan President Horacio Cartes announced he has withdrawn his resignation from the presidency, which he had presented at the end of May in order to be sworn in as a senator. I see with great regret that some lawmakers do not want the popular will of April 22 to be fulfilled, so I withdraw my resignation to the post of the President of the Republic, Cartes tweeted. The Paraguayan lower house needed to approve Cartes' resignation, but the opposition did not allow it, as they consider it to be against the Constitution. 5 days ahead of the general election in Mexico, an armed group stole over 11,000 ballot sheets in the southern Mexican state of Tabasco. The National Electoral Institute reported that a group of 4 men attacked the vehicle that was transporting ballots. The crime occurred on Monday in the city of Macuspana, birthplace of frontrunner Andrés Manuel López Obrador. After this new incident, the National Electoral Institute announced it will establish a double signature system on the sheets in order to guarantee the electoral process. Let's hear from our correspondent in Mexico City, Pablo Pérez, with more on the continuing violence ahead of these elections.
There's 2
more days left for campaigning for the elections in Mexico on July 1st. The risk management consulting company published its last report, with the figure of 130 politicians killed. In the state of Tabasco, it was reported that 11,000 electoral ballots were stolen by an armed group. In Mexico City, several social movements complained to the National Electoral Institute about the illegal use of political propaganda by the party of presidential candidate Ricardo Anaya. The party used pamphlets to wrap and sell tortillas to the people, promising a salary increase of 1,500 pesos. These kind of tactics are not allowed by the Electoral Institute.
That was Pablo Pérez from Mexico City. We'll take a short break now, but join us again after a video from our multimedia team. Welcome back. The governments of Ecuador and Colombia have confirmed that the bodies found last week in the border region of Tumaco were those of the team of journalists from El Comercio newspaper who were kidnapped and murdered on the border between the two countries.
The Attorney General of Colombia has confirmed the bodies found in Tumaco, port city and municipality of Nariño Department, Colombia, are those of journalist Javier Ortega, photographer Paul Rivas, and their driver Efraín Segarra, who were abducted and murdered on the Ecuadorian border with Colombia in March.
We have used dental records provided to us by family members to identify the remains. Also, DNA tests confirmed the information given by Colonel Fausto Olivos. The examinations were done according to international protocols.
According to the Foreign Minister, Ecuador is working with Colombia to deal with this situation and to facilitate for the relatives of the deceased to return to Ecuador with the bodies of their loved ones.
We have one of our planes in Cali, ready to bring the bodies back to Ecuador on Wednesday morning.
Lawmakers involved in this case highlight the fact that the National Assembly has gone to the considerable lengths to answer questions with regards to the abduction, but they are still demanding answers from the government.
What's most important now is finding out the truth about what happened. We have lost 3, yes, but we cannot lose the truth, and this is something that the government has not yet provided.
During the journey of the relatives to Colombia, several Colombian media outlets have published unofficial information relating to the families. Given the circumstances, the relatives have asked the governments of Ecuador and Colombia to better coordinate their efforts. They also announced they will continue with their struggle to reveal the truth about the murders. Denise Herrera, Telesur Quito, Ecuador.
On Monday, the National Workers' Union in Argentina called a national 24-hour strike in rejection of the adjustment measures of President Mauricio Macri's government and the return to the IMF. Workers, unions, social movements, and political forces joined the demonstrations.
Despite declarations from Labor Minister Jorge Triaca, who stated that this general strike benefits the leaders more than it does the people, the widespread compliance to stopping work across the nation proves the opposite.
The working sector is doing very bad with this government, and we believe that there has to be a change of direction in our politics, especially in economic and social matters, in order to correct the rampant inequality we see every day.
As workers are paying for these brutal adjustments. There are layoffs, there is downswing. How do we face this? We have to face this on the streets.
Protesters say the national strike is in defense of the working class and the most vulnerable sectors. The administration of Mauricio Macri has to listen to the complaints, because otherwise, social disputes will rise.
The IMF will have a negative impact because our currency will be undervalued. Interest rates will be very high and credit rates will be very low. Price hikes will continue and there will be no subsidies to help us. The government went to the IMF as a result of the collapse of their own politics. I want to highlight this point in particular because we face a government that has completely failed.
Rejection to the adjustment measures, as well as the agreement with the International Monetary Fund, was shared by left-wing forces and different worker unions that joined the strike by blocking highways, streets, and with activities all over the country.
We have to throw out the IMF and defeat this economic plan, and we have to start discussing what new measures we have to apply for this crisis, so that it's those at the top who pay for it. No more paying for the foreign debt. We have to renationalize companies. We have to nationalize banks and foreign trade, so all of our money stays in the country. With these measures, there will be enough money for health, education, public works, and to provide jobs. So we have to keep fighting.
Meanwhile, the government is not listening to the complaints. The workers' movement promises to stay on the streets with further actions in rejection to social exclusion and the broken economic model that is being implemented by Macri.
Teachers are still on strike in Peru, demanding extensive improvements to the education budget. Regardless, some teachers are going back to work, fearing the government's response.
The Peruvian government took an extreme measure to fight against the national teachers' strike. They replaced striking teachers with unemployed teachers, something that unions consider to be illegal and ethically wrong.
We are being used. They want to use us, and we cannot allow that. We cannot allow the government to use us as weapons against our own colleagues. We cannot accept these jobs.
On the sixth day of the open-ended strike, the teachers' union decided to expand its fight to schools in order to make parents aware of the importance of this protest, which seeks to protect education and avoid measures like further privatization.
What is a family supposed to do if they have to choose which of their children go to school because they cannot afford education for all of them? Can you imagine how this parent will feel? You cannot do that to the people, and so our president should watch out, because he's putting children's education at risk.
Teachers from all over the country have arrived at the capital of Lima to join the ongoing protest and urge the government to talk with the unions, a proposal the Peruvian government has refused so far.
We're going to prove that this government does not want to solve our decades-long problem, but we are also proving that we're going to resist. We're going to continue this fight against the government's apathy.
The teachers' union already announced they will sue the government after they decided to fire teachers on strike. According to unions, this move is against the basic rights of workers.
The Peruvian government announced it will ask Odebrecht, the Brazilian construction company involved in a worldwide bribery scandal, for $1.5 billion for reparations. According to the Minister of Justice, it's repayment for their crimes of corruption in the country. The state took into account the damages and losses created by the alleged paying of millions in bribes to officials and politicians in exchange for political favors. Lawyers of the former Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva have filed an official request to the Supreme Court of Justice asking them to review irregularities in his recent trial. They hope this will lead to Lula's release from prison, where he is serving a 12-year sentence on corruption charges.
Free or not free? That's the question facing former President of Brazil Lula da Silva, currently in jail on corruption charges. Today, the Supreme Federal Court might review a request from Lula's lawyers to release him while he awaits the results of his acquittal appeals. After the request was shelved last week, Lula's legal team made an urgent appeal to get the case reviewed today, before the annual judiciary recess. They say the former president has been in custody for 80 days under a sentencing that disrespected many constitutional guarantees, and that his fundamental rights are in danger. Fábio Tofik, a leading Brazilian lawyer, says Lula's case is complex, mostly because it depends on an interpretation of the law on which many ministers of the Supreme Federal Court disagree on.
They are debating if the appeal sent to the Supreme Court can bring forth any constitutional issues that might make the court suspend its decision to arrest Lula in the first place. But even if they might be against jail in the second instance, they could come to the conclusion that there are no constitutional issues in this specific case.
Regarding the acquittal appeals, Tofik, who analyzed Lula's sentencing back in April, says the document does have some logical flaws that could benefit Lula's case.
There are some logical mistakes. There are arguments that don't lead to the magistrate's conclusions, or shouldn't have. I believe the Supreme Court is going to be dealing with some controversial issues, to say the least.
The former president is currently serving 12 years in Curitiba's federal prison for corruption and money laundering. His opponent says justice has been done. His defense fights for his acquittal, and his supporters still hope he can run for president in this year's elections. Mia Alberti, Telesur in São Paulo.
The Caribbean Court of Justice, based in Trinidad and Tobago, will deliver a ruling Tuesday which will determine the future of former Guyanese President Dr. Bharat Jagdeo. The ruling will determine if presidents can serve more than 2 terms. Guyana amended the constitution to say that a person elected as president after the year 2000 is eligible for re-election only once. It was challenged by a private citizen, saying it unconstitutionally curtails and restricts his rights and freedom to elect the former president. Jagdeo became president in 1999 after the former president, Janet Jagan, resigned for health reasons. He won 2 elections in 2001 and 2006 and stepped down because of term limits that he approved.
And he's right about that.
In Barbados, Prime Minister Mia Mottley is laying down the law on how she expects her ministers to act while in office. Mottley held a meeting Monday telling ministers and permanent secretaries there will be no secret meetings. All meetings must have a public officer present. She also said public officers must use official emails at all times. She said the government must be aware of the importance of cybersecurity.
The Armada of the 21st century is not going to be in boats coming off Carlisle Bay, either the 17th century version or the ones in World War II. It will be through this. And it may not even be that it is intended to be at us, but we may be an instrument of someone else's war against someone.
We're taking one last short break, but join us again after another video from our multimedia team. Welcome back. Now let's take a look at today's games at the Russia World Cup. Peru has won its only match of the tournament 2-0 against Australia, while Denmark drew 0-0 against France for the first matches in Group C. Later today, Nigeria will play against Argentina and Iceland will go against Croatia in Group D. In Spain, a historic trial is about to take place to investigate thousands of cases of babies stolen from their mothers during the Francisco Franco dictatorship from 1939 to 1975. An 85-year-old doctor will be the first person to go on trial. Newborns of left-wing opponents of the regime, also from unmarried and poor couples, were removed from their mothers and adopted by rich families during Franco's regime, a practice that allegedly continued at least until the 1980s. In Morocco, refugees got a chance to prove their talent in a competition organized by the country's High Commission of Refugees in capital city Rabat. Refugees coming from Cameroon, Ivory Coast, Syria, Palestine and Libya became poets, rappers, dancers and actors during the competition Refugees Got Talent to fight prejudices against refugees using the universal language of art. Morocco is currently home to more than 5,000 refugees from 38 countries. And before we end our show, remember you can watch our special World Cup program with Argentina football star Diego Maradona. De la mano del 10, the World Cup, according to Maradona, will air only on Telesur every night during the tournament in Russia. These are the times to watch it, so don't miss out. And with that, we come to the end of this news brief. But these and other stories you can find on our website, telesurtv.net/English. And you can also join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Carla Gonzalez. Thank you for watching.